Hello, everybody. This is Sarah Colata with Architecture Talk Tank. Really excited for my guest today, Steve Chaparro. Hey, Steve, how are you doing?
Hi, well, very well. Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate you inviting me to have this conversation.
It's a pleasure, really. I'm excited. The topic today is company culture, and it has been quite an important topic to talk about now with COVID times. I feel last year, because those topics and the problems within the companies really hit hard when we realized that we have to separate our teams and work from home and things like that. And a lot of professionals started to look into solutions of how to bring that culture online and still maintain the same collaboration that you can normally have in the physical location. And I think that it has also been quite a strong topic in education in respect of studio culture for architects. So I'm really happy that I finally have an expert who knows this topic through and through, and also has a lot of experience on working with architects and practices today, essentially training architecture practices to better studio culture. So without any further ado, Steve, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself, perhaps for the people that don't know you yet?
Sure. Yeah, so I decided in high school over here in the United States that I wanted to pursue a career in architecture. So that started in my 9th of 12th grade. So I decided in 10th grade, let's do this. Let's just pick a school and get qualified to go. So I went to a really great school here in Los Angeles to study at a 5-year architecture program. And then I went into the field. I was really not sure what that career was going to look like, at least to start off as a young intern architect, just because we were coming out of a recession. I graduated in 1997, which is quite a long time ago. And I remember going into college, they told us 1992, there's not a lot of jobs. If you tried to get a job right now, you probably won't find one. But when you graduate in 1997, it's going to be much better. And sure enough, it was. So I was lucky to find a great job at a firm that actually gave me a much more experience than I had hoped I would get, because I had heard that I would have to go do details only, or to do small floor plans. But I got to actually manage projects from beginning, from schematic design all the way to construction administration. I remember being a 1 year out of college and being able to manage the construction project and be seen as the architect in the field was just amazing. But after about 5.5 years, I started to have a better sense of what the career was going to look like, the long hours, the stress, and I started to kind of see where my career was going to be maybe in 20 years at the current trajectory. I decided not to get a license, only because I felt that would pigeonhole me into the field and I would never be able to do anything else. And so I became restless within the 4 walls of architecture, and I decided to apply that design experience into other areas. So I went to real estate development, financial advisory, back to construction, and then back to architecture. There's one quote that really inspired me, and it's actually by Winston Churchill. He said, "We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us." And that was such a powerful driver in me, the mindset of the things that we shape, the environments that we shape, end up shaping us as well. But then I saw a really big focus, or really big need, that for a lot of our clients, that they felt that the architecture was going to solve a lot of their problems, and soon realized that there were deeper cultural, organizational challenges that needed to be addressed even before they got their new physical environments. And so that became the real driver for me. And so it became, we shape our culture, thereafter it shapes us, became a driving sort of mandate for me. And that's when I started a culture design studio to really help creative companies transform their workplace culture through the very same principles that we use for our clients.
So interesting, really. And before we go into this part, which is, obviously talking about studio culture, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that journey, because of course somehow you ended up doing a bit of an alternative career in
Yeah.
architecture. I believe that once an architect, always an architect, and it cannot be taken away.
Yes, absolutely.
Training that we get, which really just changes the way we see the world and engage with the world and with people around us. And I think it can be a really good basis, all that structural thinking and putting together different elements to make something happen is also something we can observe in business. So I think that already gives a lot of good foundation to develop into business. But you definitely went on this like full-on entrepreneur with a lot of different things that you did along the way. So I'm curious how it all felt and how it all came about. I'm sure that it wasn't planned straight ahead. It was more like maybe running away from something, looking for something else. But what are the key things that you could share with us after, obviously having lived that experience and today also talking about it and teaching and obviously leveraging a lot of knowledge and experience from that to help other people?
Well, I think that there is an approach that I learned even in my first year of school that really helped shape the way I kind of navigate through my life and career, which I call the grand experiment in itself. When we were taught manual drafting, they taught us never begin your design with the end already in mind, meaning all the design already pre-imagined, preconceived, because if you do that, you defraud yourself of the design's potential. And so it was very philosophical in how they shared with us, when you draw a construction line on a white piece of paper, that construction line is going to inspire the next line, which will then inspire the next line. So if you see design as this emergent process where the beauty and of the design will emerge from the process, that you are continuously open to new inspiration as you go along the way, then the end result will far outweigh what you could have ever preconceived, no matter how much of a genius you are either in your mind or in reality. And so there's been an element of that, of self-discovery, of allowing sort of the beautiful things to emerge in life. But I think the beauty that emerges is a product of a lot of frustration, a lot of sometimes pain, a lot of growth experiences, things that you discover about yourself that are great, but also things that you discover about yourself that are not so great. The things that when you hear them, like in one case, I got some bit of feedback about some things that left me sick to my stomach for a couple of weeks, because I realized, man, that's so true. And I really need to work on this because this is not good. So for me, when I think about the different things that I look to do, I remember they told us in design school or architecture school, they said 1 in 10 of you will actually work in the field. Like, you will actually go into the field of architecture. And on one hand, that was disheartening. But on the other hand, I think they missed an opportunity to tell us that there are so many other great fields that you can use your skills. And it's completely fine, because I think the way it was cast was the 9 of you that don't work in architecture, it's kind of like that's a failure.
That's a failure.
And I don't see it that way. I don't see it that way. I absolutely see it as the great experience of training, the 3 all-nighters a week that I spent with my projects, the resilience, the ability to communicate my ideas, the ability to articulate those ideas through a series of iterations. Those are skills that can be used in so many different fields. And so my career has been an emergent process of drawing lines as I go and seeing what emerges and pursuing those things that catch my attention. Now, that doesn't always work when you're trying to raise a family and provide for your family in different ways, because there's different bumps and bruises. So I think for me, I think of it as a mountainscape of tremendous peaks, but also some long and somewhat lonely and frustrating valleys. And that's just the philosophical way that I viewed my own career. But when I think of career or architecture, then going into real estate development as an area of interest in terms of mixed use development, and then the housing crisis happening, needing to reinvent myself as a financial planner, but I saw it as a financial architect. And then the market recovers, real estate development, back into architecture. Now I'm doing what I'm doing now. So it's been definitely an emergent process, but it's definitely been fueled by that philosophy of, letting the drawing or plans of your life, letting that design emerge as you navigate through your life and career.
Of course. And I do believe that each of these experiences can give you a bit of a different training and also point of view into the business of architecture or anything related to that field, because I'm sure in real estate you probably learned really good sales, which
Yeah.
can be extremely helpful with any business that you just continue developing from that point on.
I mean, to speak to that, sorry for interrupting, but to speak to that particular thing about real estate development, I mean, I entered the real estate development world at just before it peaked. And then it peaked and then it dropped. 5 of those 8 years with that particular real estate development company was in the downturn. And I would say that I learned a lot more in the downturn, or let's just say the valley, of the economy, or even of my career, because I had to learn some really good lessons. I couldn't rely on the froth of success. I had to actually create skills within myself. So I learned a lot about business, as you said, a lot about sales, a lot about marketing, a lot about how to even manage finances during that time. And it was definitely a wealth of experience that I do draw from today.
Of course. And I think it's indeed really important to get these experiences, because, when you look at an average architect, we don't get that type of training. And there's a lot of insecurity around certain topics like sales or marketing or business development. And I think that when you diversify or even look into other industries, you don't have to necessarily leave architecture to go and work in real estate to learn sales. But if you do open to learn from other industries, you can definitely substitute on these lacks of knowledge that come from architecture school.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about the company culture. It's a really interesting topic, and I think that even more so, like I mentioned before, relevant today. But let's just start with this kind of normal case scenario where everyone works in the office.
Yeah.
What are the principles to look at, and really quite curiously, what is company culture?
Yeah, I think company culture is such a hard thing to kind of define in one particular context. I think I like to think of culture in the context of the life cycle of a firm. For a person to start an architecture firm or any type of creative services firm, it takes a special type of person to go out on their own. I think a lot of times we say that that's a dream of ours, but it is hard work. So it takes a certain person with a certain mindset, a driver, probably a type A personality, the entrepreneur, to do that. And so I think many times the success, if a firm is successful, it is because of the hard driving nature of their founder. And they create sometimes a cult. There's always a culture. In fact, I say there's always a strong culture in any particular firm. When you think of how do people behave, how do people work, what are the unspoken rules about what is acceptable here, what is not acceptable here. I think every company has a strong culture. It just may not be a healthy culture. And I think there's a big difference in terms of how do you define that. And I think because I think sometimes a strong culture, if it's negative, can actually be a big stumbling block for that firm's culture moving forward, because they're deeply entrenched in their ways of thinking, deeply entrenched in what they accept. A lot of times you think of some of these creative services founders or creative firm founders, and they're very charismatic many times. They can convince people to work with them. They have these, what in the beginning is seen as confidence can sometimes end up being arrogance. And they say, hey, we are successful because my name's on the door, or it's my personality. Got the Starkitect complex that sometimes emerges. And I just saw too many times that if there is a successful firm, that all of the credit is given to the person's name on the door. And they don't give enough credit to the people that are actually doing the work. And I just saw that too many times that happens, and there's not enough credit that is being given out to the rest of the people, or given voice, even if it's internally, given a voice to the things that are working or not working in the firm. I was very much influenced by Ed Catmull's book, Creativity, Inc. And he says that any creative team needs to have a certain element of candor in their team to be able to agree, to disagree, to even argue openly, to be able to have those diverse opinions. And when you have a person who's starting a firm that is very successful, very opinionated, many times they don't allow for those voices to happen. So I think it's very interesting. You hear that saying that a cobbler's son who has no shoes.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes applies to us in the professional services world, that the very same principles we espouse for our clients to use as they're thinking through their problems and their own solutions, many times we fail to employ those same principles for ourselves. And I think that's what makes me really passionate about culture in creative firms.
So interesting, really. And how do you find that apply right now to the virtual world?
Yeah, it is very interesting, because I think what happens is it exposed things. COVID has exposed things that are sort of in the underbelly of a company or a firm. It has exposed the really great things about certain leadership. I think great leadership rises to the top during moments of crisis. But I also think that when there are some toxic elements that exist within a firm, that can also be exposed. I had a friend that was telling me that, and I think it's probably not uncommon, that a firm leader or firm principal would say that they would be somewhat of a micromanager, that they would kind of peer over the shoulders. They like the office because they can walk around the office. They can literally peer over someone's shoulder and ask how they're doing, and maybe direct them in certain ways. And that part of that micromanagement mindset is a lack of trust. And that became even more prevalent in COVID, when we're not able to actually work together side by side. The manager couldn't peer over their team member's shoulder. And so, one, it exposed a lack of trust, but it also created an opportunity to trust. And so I think having those open conversations about those things, being able to pull back and allow people to voice their thoughts and opinions. And I think the need for communication has definitely surfaced, and I think people are doing great. The one thing that I fear coming out of COVID, as we prepare, God willing, to go back into the office, is that we don't take the lessons that we've learned during COVID, the positive lessons, and that we continue to use them moving forward. I think that would be one of the greatest business travesties, is that if we don't take those lessons learned in a post-COVID world.
Absolutely. So what would you suggest to be like the key, most important ingredients that people should focus on as they move forward, especially now? I mean, I don't know what it's like in America currently, but for us, apparently the lockdown is ending soon. Hopefully, with the vaccine around, like within 6 months to 8 months, we're gonna go back to normal, and I can imagine there's gonna be a lot of catching up to do. There is a lot of that pressure, but then also like rebuilding the strength of the team and really getting people focused on projects again, back into that actually schedule of really working and things like that. And I think that really ties into company culture and how that is going to get buffered, right? What would be the key pointers that you suggest as an expert?
I think that there are three areas. I think one is culture, which we've talked about. I think a really concerted area, focus on culture, and I'll go into that in a minute. So culture is one. I think communication is another one, and I think co-creation is a third one. So if you want, I can kind of break down some thoughts on each one of those. I think culture, which we talked about, the trust, the psychological safety, dealing with some of those things that are really, really important. I actually think that the difficulty we had going from the office to working from home, we're going to experience that again, but in reverse, because we're going to transition from working from home to going back into the office. Now, any change, even if it's for the better, we're still going to experience some degree of loss because we've become somewhat familiar with working from home. And we think that, going back into the office is going to be so much better because of the things that we couldn't experience working from home. But there is still going to be some transition. So I don't want to minimize the fact that even if you started to develop a good culture working remotely, you have to do a ton of work to make sure, one, that those lessons are carried over into a post-COVID world, but making sure that that transition is also going to be tough and that we have to account for some of that, because it just is a fact. I think the second one of communication, we've realized that communication has become so much more important in when we're on lockdown, and we don't want to give up those lessons. But I think having two-way conversations, I'm a communicator. I give speeches as well for a living, and I've prided myself that I'm a great communicator from the stage. But what I've had to learn is that I'm not as great of a communicator when it comes to me talking with my peers, me talking with my boss, me talking to my team, that there's a lot that I have in my head that I sometimes fail to communicate well through my speaking in communication. So communication is another really important thing. And I think the third thing of co-creation, because we're the founders of firms, because we're leaders, because we're principals, we think we have the greatest ideas, and maybe we've had success because it has been because of our ideas. I think that leaders must go from architects, meaning predetermining the solutions and saying, I have the best ideas, I can figure it out on my own, this is how I'm trained, this is what I've done for 20, 30 years. Go from being an architect to being a facilitator, realizing that the best subject matter experts of your firm, of your team, of your culture, and of communication are actually not you and not third-party consultants, but it's actually your team members. And so bringing them into the process of saying, hey, why don't you help me determine what this will look like? I'm going to give you an idea of the direction that I want us to go and what it could potentially look like, but I want you to help me create what it will look like. And by doing that, it'll actually be much better than what I shared with you in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. So interesting. So you mentioned also public speaking, and I know that this is somehow a career which you're building also around talking about studio culture, but also other things related to leadership. Is this, of course, we know it's not like a traditional path for architects, but in the same time, I feel that a lot of architects do end up being on the stage and talking either about their career, their projects, or just giving lectures. So it's not really like a separate element from where the industry is at and the traditional path of an architect. Did you find it somehow correlated, or was it a completely different thing that brought you into speaking and public speaking?
Yeah, I think it's multiple things, including training in architecture. So one, you think back to architecture school. Think of what we did every week, and when we presented our projects in a critique session, and we presented to our professors as well as other members of the critique panel. That was presentation. That was communication. We had to articulate our ideas, and that was trial by fire. How many of us remember, our models being destroyed in front of us, like this piece should not be there, it should be there, and the thick skin that we had to develop. But that was presentation, that was speaking, that was communicating. And also when we go into the world of clients, we had to present and basically sell our ideas to clients. We had to sell our services to potential clients as well. So I think many times there are some people that say, I went to architecture school just to do the design. I don't want to deal with clients. I don't want to deal with the business stuff. I don't want to sell all these things. And I think that's an area that we should continue to bolster up in terms of presentation, speaking as part of our normal course of business. And that's just the traditional world of architecture. That's not even thinking of having a podcast or giving lectures. I think many times giving lectures or doing podcasts is part of, say, a business development tool that we can use to share our thoughts, share our ideas, share the way we think about architecture, think about the way we service our clients, the way we come up with ideas and solutions. I think that's another way to think about it. But I think also seeing speaking not so much just as a cost center, meaning I'm going to speak for free so that I could win business. That's kind of using speaking as a cost center. But when we use it as a profit center, the way I'm thinking about it is I actually want to get paid speaking fees for the value that I bring to the audiences that I am in front of. And so thinking of it as a professional speaker, like that fuels me. Like I love being in a room, sharing thoughts, sharing ideas, seeing the lights turn on in people's heads. That is amazing because I want to see transformation, not just in me, in my team, or the people that I work with individually, but also if we want to see widespread change in our industry, if not the world, we need to use our voice. And we have the way we think can translate to a powerful way in the way we speak so that it can change the way things are going on around us.
Absolutely. And I think what's really interesting is that component also of storytelling and like touching people with the story. It's obviously quite an important aspect of architecture as well. We very often talk about telling a story through architecture or developing a story as we design this sort of journey for the customer or the user of the building. I remember back at school learning about Rem Koolhaas, where he took this sort of filmmaking narrative and implemented it into buildings, and it was all about developing a story. And I think that essentially, like public speaking and touching people with stories, really.
Well, I mean, to your point about using architecture to tell stories, I mean, that's a big part of my background when I was at Visionary Studios. The firm was founded by Mel McGowan, who worked at the Walt Disney Company for many years. And he learned from Walt Disney because Walt Disney, when he was making cartoons and making movies, these are all two-dimensional stories. And he decided that he wanted to break through that third wall, if you will. And he wanted to invite his audience into a three-dimensional story. So he wanted to create not just a story, but a space in which they could experience those stories. And that's where Disneyland came to play. So if we can think of our spaces, and that's what Visionary became known as spatial storytellers, is taking the story of the client and being able to embody that story in their space, so that space, when they invite their guests to navigate through the space, it's like telling a story. And so at our office there, we would, whenever potential clients would come to the office, the space was designed in literally a story format, that there was a sequence that we would tour our guests through the space to tell a story that not only told a story of who we were as an organization, but it told a story of how we actually work with our clients. And so we trained our employees or team members to tell the same story, to give that tour throughout the office. And so when they did that, they had to absorb and embody those same cultural values and then see it play out as they navigated the space each and every day. So the idea of using space as a story, I mean, I think of, when you think of a building as taking your guests through a journey, a sequential journey, like it literally has a beginning, middle, and an end with different elements. It becomes so powerful when you demonstrate that that's the way it is. The eyes are opened, and you're able to so much more appreciate it in a powerful way.
Sure, absolutely. And I think that storytelling altogether is like a really strong part of architecture, and a lot of us connect to it because it's an art form on its own, and it really acts like a glue, to create a relationship between the human experience and the building. Really, it's how we assemble all these different elements together to into a storyline. And yeah, it's a really powerful tool, I think, to develop, become really good at it also. And I'm sure that, with public speaking as well, you have to master storytelling in so many different aspects too. So that's really fascinating. And I'm generally very interested in alternative ways in which architects can practice and how they can express themselves. And I think that is one of these ways, because and this is something also you suggested to me, the business of expertise, the book which you suggested to me the last time when we spoke. I can't remember, who was it by?
David C. Baker.
Exactly. And I feel like this has really quite a strong connection to that, because architects become experts at some point. We become expert at something because of our experience that we get, and also the knowledge and the research that comes on top of it all. And so how do you articulate it, through your work? It's a big part of storytelling. And I think as you mature, leaving legacy or somehow contributing towards education and teaching others as well, is actually going out there and lecturing or ending up on stages talking about projects. So from client presentations, or like even before student presentations, through studio presentations to client presentations, and then eventually also lecturing. So I think it's really quite a big element.
Well, I know that a lot of the firms that I've talked to, a lot of principals, that one of the things that they are interested in, and not necessarily, it's hard for them to actually, I won't use the term pull the trigger, but to actually green light the investment, and that is to actually train their team members in how to present, or to train them in how to communicate, or to even do storytelling. Because that is a huge element. And I think if you're able to tell stories, that's going to propel your career, whether you're wanting to go from a drafter to a job captain to a project manager, studio lead, principal, whatever that is. Storytelling will help you launch your career, because you're able to tell stories, you're able to communicate. That's such a powerful skill that there's not a high percentage of people that know how to do that. So that's definitely something to learn to do, not only how to present, but then how to communicate internally. There's the external communication, internal communication. And I think if more firms were trained and brought in a culture of storytelling, that is amazing. Not only do you give them bite-sized messaging that they can use to be storytellers on behalf of the firm. And that's one thing I've always been a proponent of. Don't leave the storytelling to the professionals, because many times we can see storytelling as a specialty. And we say, oh, that guy, he's the business developer, or that guy's the author in our firm, or that guy's the podcaster. He's going to do all those storytelling. She's going to do all the storytelling. And I think that's a disservice to the firm as a whole. Yeah. But if you're able to train and equip your entire company, it doesn't matter if they're in accounting, if they're able to tell the story of your firm. And so I think that's the reason why branding for an architecture firm or creative services firm is so important. It's not so much whether the client understands the branding. It's almost as if the team member can communicate the branding. That's when I think the branding is actually really good, is when everybody in the company can tell that story, or tell about that positioning, tell the branding story, as well as being an evangelist, being a business developer. Everyone should be equipped to be a business developer for the firm as well.
Absolutely. And I think that all ties back into culture, like brand culture, brand identity, and actually this studio culture, because when you think about certain brands that achieve that level really well, like Mac, for example, it's almost like every single user becomes a brand ambassador just by trying the product.
Yes, absolutely.
It's quite well known that if you go Mac, you don't go back, and it's kind of true. Like, it happened to me. I know a lot of people, and it's also just that the culture of the brand, the culture, the message, the story behind that this business is so powerful that you somehow connect, because it's simple, and it's really conveyed through the products, but also through the lifestyle that the products offer. Right now, more and
Yeah.
more products are like imitating it, but when it really came out, and still I think that it's a leading company for designers, really, if it comes to software and usage of the products as well.
Yeah, I think brand is an important thing. Culture is an important thing, but I think what's even more important is that they're both aligned. Too many times you might have this gregarious, charismatic founder or principal of a firm who is a great storyteller, and they're telling stories. This is who we are. If you work with us, this is what you'll get. Or if you come and work with us as part of our team, this is what you're going to experience. But when they come into the firm, they realize, oh no, like it's a totally different story, because that guy sold us a bill of goods, and everyone has to reap the whirlwind of what he or she said. And so there's a disconnect between that message and what is actually experienced each and every day. So it's important to make sure that we do think about that alignment between the two. And I think there's the brand, there is the actual experience culture, and then there's the actual plan for how that company is going to grow, or firm is going to grow, and having some good solid systems and ways of making that happen.
Absolutely. And I think that once that's in place, almost like every employer becomes that ambassador, becomes a firm believer in the brand, in the process, in the story, and it's sort of just it's and like an auto promotion of the actual culture that you have within the firm,
Yeah.
and it's a
Yeah.
really powerful process.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, once you've been in the field for a while, you'll realize that even if you do those things well, of having your brand be a powerful brand that attracts people, and you have a powerful culture that is aligned with that brand, there are going to be times where we do find clients that are at the end of the day not aligned with who we are. And I think a magnetic message is both attractive. It's going to attract some people, and it's going to repel others. And so I think that even if you have a solid brand, a solid message, it doesn't mean that it's going to satisfy everyone. And I think that's actually part of the growing process, is also realizing who is it that you're trying not to work with, or won't work with. Because I think when you understand that, that'll also help you really define who you are. And sometimes you have to make some really hard decisions in order to test those values. I remember one time we had a potential client that we were working with really hard to try to see if we could work together. And they were very resistant to our advice ahead of time, even after working with them 4 or 5 sessions. And we decided to walk away from, it's not a huge project, but a $7 million project for us at that time was a big project, and we could have used that project. But we knew that if we were not in alignment between us and our client, that was something that was going to wreak havoc for the project as well as for the team. And so when the team heard that we walked away from a potential problem client, they actually thanked us. And I think for them internally, it showed that we wanted to stick to our values.
Absolutely, because I think it builds trust basically internally, also between the team members, and you believe that basically the leadership is driving this company, the ship, in the right direction, where you want to only work with people that will also respect all the individual members involved on the team, and the value that jointly you provide. It's really important, I think, and it really is important to keep the value high of individuals involved, of the expertise, as well as the delivery process.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately, if we have complaints and valid complaints about our industry, a lot of times I say, well, if we allowed it to happen, if we gave in to either the lower fee or we gave in to working with a client that we knew would possibly not value what we brought to the table, and we did it anyways, we're reaping the sort of the consequences of those decisions. So I think we have the ability to somewhat shape our own practices, shape our client base, and maybe even help shape the industry. However, that is going to come at great cost. So for me, passion is not about the amount of benefit or pleasure that you gain from any one thing. It's in reality, it's the pain that you're willing to endure to see what you want to see happen.
Beautiful. On that note, thank you so very much for joining me on this talk, Steve, really. Is there anything you would like to announce in respect to your business, or?
Sure. I mean, people can follow me at stevechaparro.co. And I'm going to be launching soon, in about a month, a free audio course, really geared to what I call frustrated visionaries. It's those that want to help have a passion-driven approach to launching or to having a business, but they also want to avoid burning people out. I call myself a frustrated visionary. So this is really something that I wish I would have had early in my career to help me navigate these issues of culture, communication, and all these other things that we've talked about. So if people want to just go to stevechaparro.co, they can sign up for my newsletter, and then I can notify them when that's coming out. But that'd be awesome. Also LinkedIn and the Culture Design Show is my podcast on all of the podcast platforms.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Steve. Guys, do follow Steve Chaparro on LinkedIn and opt in also on his website, and also subscribe to my channel for more architecture talk tanks, which are happening now regularly on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and occasionally like this one over the weekend as well.
Well, thank you, Sarah. It's been an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thanks, guys, for tuning in.